Well, hello, and welcome to Bio 211, Chapter 6. This is Anatomy and Physiology 1, and this is a section at Norwalk Community College. And we're in Chapter 6, like I said a moment ago, and what we're doing is we're looking at, now, different types of fractures and repair at bone before we move over to calcium homeostasis. And so far we've covered what are the general characteristics of the skeletal system, what are the general characteristics of individual long bones. How do we actually build flat bone and long bone? What is the difference between, say, appositional growth and longitudinal growth? I don't know. Growth in length versus growth in thickness, okay? And now we're just going to take a couple of minutes to look at what happens to bone when it breaks. And I'm not interested in you guys learning the different types of breaks. Compound fractures, closed simple fractures, where you actually have bone that's splintered, crushed, or broken into pieces. Think hand underneath, I don't know, something really heavy. Okay, green strip fracture where it's broken on one side and the other side bends. Think of like your tibia and your fibula when you actually get into a car accident or something like that. Impaled fracture, where you have lateral fracture forcefully driven into one another. I have a great story about that. If we ever get time inside class, I'll tell you about it. But, you know, at the end of the day, most people suffer from something like a stress fracture. You do a lot of running, and you're not taking care of the amount of calcium and phosphate inside your body, or the constant pounding on the tissue causes these microscopic fissures inside bone. And here are some radiographs of these different types of breaks. Don't memorize them. This is more FYI than anything else. And what I mean by that specifically is these are breaks you're going to encounter. How would you actually feel them? That would be palpation, right? You're comparing one side to the other side, and this is actually how you figure out what's going on. What's more important is you understand how we actually repair that bone. Because obviously calcium and phosphorus are needed to strengthen and harden new bone after a fracture. But remember, I've told you already, calcium phosphate is a crystalline salt. So therefore, when we break it, it cuts everything. It cuts blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, nervous tissue. So that actually has to be fixed first. And that's why you create what's called a fracture hematoma. Fracture hematoma. And blood leaks from the torn ends of blood vessels have to be clotted quickly. You do a large cut through a large blood vessel, say inside your femur, so your femur breaks, you cut through, say, your femoral artery. You're not going to make it through that. Okay, you have a very limited window of time where you actually have a really large blood vessel that's pumping blood out of your body. That fracture hematoma will be replaced with a fibrocartilaginous callus. And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. That hematoma, while it's repairing everything, is actually literally repairing the blood vessels. Fibroblasts are going to invade the fracture site, and they're going to produce collagen, fibers that are going to bridge the broken ends of bones. And literally, imagine if you osteoclasts and osteoblasts work in teams, creating ends of bones that are now aligned with one another, and they can now be reformed because a bony callus will replace that fibrocartilaginous callus. And what's going to end up happening is you have trabecular bone that replaces that fibrocartilaginous structure. At the end of it, we end up having compact bone that will replace the spongy bone, though. And that's going to take time. You can see here inside the next figure where they've sort of done a time lapse here. If you've ever broken a bone, you know the horror that goes along with it. Notice in this case, the bone didn't break out through the periosteal membrane. All havoc can happen when that happens, but generally speaking, it's never good. The periosteal membrane also acts as a very good barrier for keeping bacteria out. But here's where the bone is actually cut through everything. You create that fracture hematoma, white blood cells, red blood cells, osteoclasts move in here. They clean up all the mess. Fibrocartilaginous bone callus is going to now be repaired inside this space, holding everything in place while the repair continues. Okay? And then you're going to replace the fibrocartilaginous callus with a bony callus. And notice it's a specific type of bone, trabecular bone. And ultimately, the fibrocartilaginous callus that was replaced by this bony callus will be replaced ultimately with compact bone. And notice, take a look at the fact you actually had a ruptured blood vessel here. It's now repaired. You still have osteoclasts remodeling tissue and osteoblasts actually laying new tissue down so that everything's been returned to normal. The last thing I want us to think about inside chapter 6 is, well, okay, so we have bones, and these bones help us with locomotion, and they help us fight against gravity, and they help us protect our organs. How do we think about their role in homeostasis? And, this is a figure from your textbook, and I wish I could make it bigger inside this, but let's see what I can do here. Hold on a second. Let's go like that. Let's go like that. Look at that. No. Let's go like that. Cool. Let's see if I can do this. No, go like that. There we go. Now I'm going to make it display. It's going to look weird. It's going to be sort of odd to the eye to look at. But notice what's happening here. You'll have some stimulus disrupts homeostasis. Who cares what it is? You have decreasing blood calcium levels. You've been thinking too much. You need all that calcium for exocytosis, for mediated, remember, receptor-mediated exocytosis. There are a series of receptors located inside the parathyroid glands that detect changes in concentration of calcium. They have detected that there are low calcium levels, and therefore, inside those cells, they're going to now turn on the parathyroid hormone gene, and the parathyroid hormone gene is going to release parathyroid hormone. Right here, let's go. Okay, I know this is circling it right there. And notice, inside your text, first they stress that it's the osteoclasts that are going to be activated, right? And it makes sense that they do it this way because you're going to start breaking down bone. It releases the hydrochloric acid. The digestive enzymes get to work, and you're now releasing calcium and phosphate into the bloodstream. Do not forget that the parathyroid hormone is also targeting your kidneys, so you can excrete the phosphate, but also keep the calcium and simultaneously increase calcitriol. So your kidneys do two things. They pee out phosphate, they increase calcitriol concentration, and now you can absorb more calcium that you've just been broken down. It's just been broken down from bone, right? This is good. Eventually we get back to our normal calcium concentration levels, and guess what? We don't need any more parathyroid hormone. Okay? So let's take a look. Think of this in terms of a review for your final exam. Well, this looks like a reflex, right? Because you have receptors, a control center, and effector. Notice there are no neurons here. So this is actually endocrine homeostasis of calcium concentration inside your bloodstream. One more time to make sure you get the importance here. There has to be a receptor that's going to send a signal to a control center that's going to cause some sort of effect. And in the past, when we've seen this, we saw it in terms of reflex systems or feedback systems, right? Or reflexes and feedback systems, okay? And also the nervous system. Well, it's not. In fact, this is now part of your endocrine system, and our endocrine system is using a hormone, and the hormone is parathyroid hormone. Okay? Cool. That parathyroid hormone, it's doing many things, but I also want to make sure, I'm just going to say it now in print. Parathyroid hormone regulates calcium exchange between blood and bone tissue. Parathyroid hormone, as it's increasing its concentration inside the bloodstream, it's increasing the number of osteoclasts that are breaking down bone. That calcium can't be lost in the urine. So you pee out the phosphate, but the parathyroid hormone also increase calcitriol concentration, which means calcium, it's inside the foods inside your gastrointestinal tract, will now also be reabsorbed. So if we need to decrease calcium concentration, we're going to use the hormone calcitonin, and calcitonin is made inside the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland and the parathyroid gland are not the same structure. Calcitonin activates osteoclasts and osteoblasts, okay, where the osteoclasts are inhibited, but osteoclasts are activated. And what happens is you then transport, or you trap more calcium and phosphate inside the actual bone itself. Okay, and where would you need this? Well, let's take a look at this here. Well, anytime you're actually doing more work that puts stress on the bone, then skeletal muscles will help work against the pull of gravity, and therefore you actually have to build a more thickened bone to support that pull against gravity. that's a pretty good place to stop. I mean, I do want to mention just in passing here, just because you can see it, the two principal effects of aging on bone. And that, of course, is you're going to lose calcium. You stop eating, and you also lose regulation, and that leads to osteoporosis, which leads to brittleness inside your bone. Okay? Part of that's the collagen. Part of it is your lack of motion. Believe it or not, stopping is dying on the planet. It really is. The less you move, the less likely you are to keep things functioning properly. But inside of this is a really devious and evil. Do you get that? Devious plan. Inside the length of your bone, we've been depositing yellow bone marrow, and now you have osteoporotic bone. When you fall and break your hip, or you break your femur, now you've released triglycerides into your bloodstream, and that's never a good combination. Make sure to ask me about what happens. Okay, this is it for Chapter 6. I hope you've learned a lot. Now remember, now you've read the book, you've watched these 3 videos, and now take a step back. Can you see how Mother Nature has made 206 bones, all built slightly differently? They articulate, so they support some really basic responsibilities. But when you look more closely, how she's built them, so they have these generalized mechanisms for building, generalized mechanisms for remodeling, generalized mechanisms for repair. Okay, that's a pretty good place to stop. Okay, have a great day.